Good morning, 감독님.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing good, 감독님.
How's your DS ministry?
Oh, 감독님, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think COVID makes it worse.
Oh, really?
Nobody can tell me what I'm supposed to be doing, if I'm doing okay. So
I know your district include Guam.
Guam and Saipan, 목사님.
Oh, wow.
Ah, but Guam, the members are Asians, but the leaders are all white.
Oh,
And then the
interesting.
pastor is Tongan. So
I see.
I think, yeah, the pastor shared me there's a little bit of colonialism going on. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very different from the land.
Yeah, this is a difficult time to do a DS ministry.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so.
Think about the COVID-19 situation and also the denomination situation. This is a very challenging time.
Definitely. No one wrote a manual on how to become a DS. And you know how when you become a DS, you go through the training with GBHEM?
That's right, yeah.
We didn't meet at Juneau, Alaska because of COVID. So we met online. So our training was very truncated too.
I see.
But luckily, Hansei 목사님 and Tom Choi 목사님, they left their manuals. So I get to read them, but they didn't prepare me much. 감독님.
Yeah, one of the challenges in understanding the role of DS is one side of DS is say that we are not your pastors, we are your supervisors.
Yes.
So the another side is what is the role of DS? He or she is a pastor for pastors. So these two conflicts going on. So of course we can, okay, well, I'm a supervisor, so you cannot consult your issues with me because it may bring some disadvantage in your appointment process. But I think still, I tried to combine these two. Even though one pastor, because of the misconduct, sexual misconduct, I had to file the complaint against her. And then we reached a just resolution. But she was in difficult situation. Psychologically, physically, she was in bad shape. That might be the reason she fell into that kind of trap. So I tried to provide some kind of pastoral care. Suddenly she said, okay, Reverend Joe, I'll take a vacation around the Thanksgiving. Suddenly she left. And then a couple of days later, she called me and then my counselor is with me, but I need to share with you some confidential issues. So she shared her story. My heart was broken. So my first word was, God still loves you. Thank you so much for sharing with me. She was shocked, actually. She expected a big scold.
A lecture.
Yeah, some kind. But I felt mercy on her. So she never forget what I said that moment. So even though we went through complaint process, we had a good relationship. And she appreciated that role. So sometimes we face that kind of challenges, but how can we do while supervise DSS supervise also as a pastor? So when we had a cabinet meeting and then informed the appointment result, I always emphasize the DS, please share this news with pastor's heart. This is all I can do, something not that kind of thing. We tried our best, but I think this is what we can offer best. Something like that. So that's a different approach.
That is.
So
That's
I always emphasize, do not lose your pastor's heart.
oh, Kamdamim, that is so helpful because throughout the training, that's what they were drooling in us. They're like, "You're
That's
not
right.
the pastor of the
Yeah.
pastor." So
Yeah.
we're stepping up, and I'm like, I don't understand. If I'm not the pastor of the pastor, then what's my role? And they're like, "You are the chief missional strategist." And
Have a build up a good relationship with the pastors. Without relation, you cannot get their support and help.
that's so
Then
true.
you'll be alone.
Right.
Lone ranger.
Exactly. Oh, thank you for your words of wisdom, Kamdamim. You're such a blessing to me. Hello, everyone.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Very windy day in Washington area.
Oh, I'm gonna lower the shade. I just found this out when I moved to Hawaii, is that Hawaii doesn't have, I guess, what Koreans call summertime. So we never fall back. So it's morning here, and so the sun is just so bright, but it's too dark. Okay, so let me just, sorry, I'm in my living room, so let's see if you can see me better. No, so it's either all or nothing. That's what it sounds like. Okay. So I think our pastors from New Jersey will be joining us later. They have another webinar that is conference sponsored. So we'll just give a few more minutes before we begin. Let's see. Let me go to the gallery view. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're here. Okay, let's give a few more minutes.
11.
How is everyone doing? Couple are doing well. Okay. All right. Good to see you.
Anybody else?
I know. You can be honest. I'm not your supervisor. I'm not going to hold it against you. All right. Also, everybody's in their winter gear. The temperature must be dropping. That's what I miss from moving to Hawaii. It's always summertime here. So I don't get to enjoy the change of the temperature.
Los Angeles is nothing, actually.
But Bishop, we still have our winter. So I had a meeting at G-Corps a couple years ago, and it was like the temperature was below zero. So, coming from California, if the temperature drops below like 55, you don't know how to calculate that. You're like, I don't know how cold that is. So I wore my parka, and they were all laughing at me. They're like, California. So
I think tonight the temperature will drop to around the 30s in this Virginia area. Yeah.
Still warm here in California.
What's the temperature? Okay,
Northern California is a little bit colder than south, right?
It's definitely cooler, but in comparison to the East Coast, I'm sure it's your summer weather, comfortable weather. And I bought I guess I just have a lot of clothes with flowers. And so people my colleagues from California, they're like, oh, are you dressing more like Hawaii? And I'm just like, no, I bought these from California. Our Hawaiian flower shirts. It's real. All right, it's 9:05, so let us begin at 9:04. So let us give one more minute. And then we'll begin. Okay. Reverend Chung just wrote me.
Pastor from Virginia, thank you for your faithful attendance. I appreciate that. Also, to all other pastors from other conferences.
And that's been consistency. Pastors from Virginia in previous Madang years, they've been very faithful. So Bishop, it's your hard work.
Well,
Wholeness of your hard
some
work.
other DSS work.
That's
Ah,
right.
true, yeah.
That's right. Well, it's 9:05. Let us begin with the word of prayer. Let us pray. Eternal and Holy One, at one time, the disciples asked Jesus, teach us how to pray. And today, your servants come asking you, teach us how to preach. So Lord our God, utilize this time and space so that we may tap in to our role and responsibility to preach your word for the world. Help us to grow. Help us to learn from one another. Help us to push and grow in ways in our wildest dreams to bring honor and glory to you. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right, good morning. Unlike other instructors, I need your active participation. So if you don't participate, it's gonna be very boring. Okay, it looks like I have to log out and then come back in because I'm not given the host abilities and I need to share my screen. So please give me 2 minutes and I'll be right back.
Tang 목사님, snow. It snows. It is snowing in your area.
Yes, this afternoon, yeah, it starts to snow here.
In Hawaii, good morning, but in Eastern Standard Time, yeah, good afternoon.
Right.
It's the first time it's snowing in the Roanoke in the area. 남석 백 목사님. It's the first time, the first snow.
I think so.
Yes, it's first time.
Wow, you are miserable to sit on a chair in your home. It's the first snow. It's very reasonable to go outside to meet someone.
So it's snowing somewhere
Yeah.
in the East Coast?
East Coast, yeah, the Appalachian Mountain area.
Oh, I see. Wow, already. All right, can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, remember you have to unmute yourself and speak because it's gonna be a very long 2 hours if you don't. So I want you to use the chat box and answer some questions I have. Question number 1. What's the most difficult thing about preaching for you? Actually, we'll do this later. All right, let's see. Maintaining coherent flow of thoughts that's easy to understand. Okay, so cohesiveness didn't go well the way I prepared or planned. Okay, thank you for sharing. Preaching in my third language, that is very hard. Yes. All right, let's move on to preaching about offering. Okay, talking about money is hard. Finding what God wants to tell me and my congregation at this right time. That is correct. That is correct. Finding the right examples and stories. You're absolutely right. Okay. Thank you. Let's go to question number 2. Okay. If you can improve one thing about yourself as a preacher, what would it be? If you are giving a magical wand, and you can make yourself improve or do anything, what would that be so that you'll be a better preacher? You want to be able to preach without a manuscript. Okay. Everybody's a wonderful preacher. We don't have to improve anything. You don't want to be anyone else. 15 minutes someday. Yeah, delivery skill. Okay. Alrighty. Pure heart. Okay. Connecting better with where people are. Good points. Wow, these are very good. All right, let me move to question number 3. Let's see. To preach with easy words to understand. That's very important. Fluent English speaking, so I can preach without fear of making mistake on grammar. Okay, very valid. All right, new question. How long do you spend in sermon preparation each week? Honestly, I'm not your board of ordained ministry, so honestly. Hour, 2 hour, a day or 2, 3 days, okay. Not sure, reading and thinking 5, 6 hours, but writing in an hour or 2 hours. Me too, 3 days. Okay. Not long enough, never measured hours. Okay. Hmm. 3 sermons at a time. Wow. Thinking all the time, but actually writing in several hours. Okay. All right. Let us move to the last question. How long do you preach? How long is your sermon? – 12 to 15, 15, 12 to 15, 20, 20, 15. Okay. 25, 25. Wow, 20. Okay. 15 to 20. Oh, sometimes 35. Wow. 15 to 20. 15. All right. Anywhere from 15 to 20 seems like a popular answer. All righty. What is the magic number? So are you guys familiar with TED Talks? Yes, it's very popular, correct? So do you know how long each TED Talk is? The maximum sharing time. The speaker doesn't have to take up the entire time, but what is the maximum time allowed? Anybody? Use the chat box. Oh, let's see. 15, very close, very close. 10, it's a little bit higher than 15. 12, it's 18 minutes. That's the maximum time that's given to the speaker. And that time slot is just enough for one idea to be shared. So now let me ask you this. Most of you answer that you preach anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes. Then has the length of your sermon changed during this year due to the pandemic? Please let me know. How long do you preach during COVID season? Use the chat box, please. Still 15, okay. Same, 12, 15, 12, 20, okay. So consistency is your middle name. Okay, same length. All right, 20. My recommendation, shorter is better. I would say 10 minutes. And definitely do not go over 15 minutes during COVID. So let me know in the chat box, how many ideas do you share in your sermon? One. Oh, one, two, one or two, one focus and one function. Very good. One. All righty. Okay, so when you see a book on the slide, that means the information is coming from that book. So just FYI. So according to the author, he perused over 200 TED Talks, and he came to understand the most popular, most captivating, most inspiring TED Talk had one thing in common. So let me know, what makes a TED Talk captivating, in your opinion? Out of so many speakers, and it's not just random persons coming to talk and share their random thought. I mean, these people are experts. They specialize in their field. They have been chosen to come and speak. But out of all those who are the best of the best in their field, what makes some TED speakers stand out, in your opinion? Use the chat box. Great storytelling. Clear points and examples, okay. Confidence, real stories, okay. And you are right. The great TED Talks all contained stories. All right. So the author comes to a conclusion that great TED speakers are great storytellers. So people, when they're listening to good, captivating, inspiring TED Talks, they don't feel like they're being lectured or being preached at. So that was one thing that the author points out. And he also goes to point out a very important point, that so many people are self-centered. They like to talk about themselves. They like to hear about themselves. So there are magic words that is very helpful when TED Talk speakers engage these words, and they are you. When you make you statements rather than I statements, people responded more positively. But there is a word that's powerful, more powerful than you. Can you guess what that is? Especially when you're trying to communicate something negative. You is powerful, but we, you're correct. The we word is even more powerful. So here's an example that the author employs. You are sometimes so afraid of failing that you never take actions towards your goals. We are sometimes so afraid of failing that we never take actions toward our goals. So when you're talking about something negative, try to use we word, because people will be more receptive to receiving it. So how do you end your sermon? Sometimes people end sermons on a high note. Sometimes preachers end their sermons on a low note. But according to studying various TED Talks, the author recommends that when you finish your presentation, you should end with a clear call to action or clear next step. So I'm going to show you an example. Let me see. Of a TED Talk. This is Amy Cuddy, and she talks about her presentation is on your body language shapes who you are. So I'm going to just show you a clip of her beginning and her end.
So a handshake or the lack of a handshake can have us talking for weeks and weeks and weeks, even the BBC and the New York Times. So obviously, when we think about nonverbal behavior or body language, but we call it nonverbals as social scientists, it's language. So we think about communication. When we think about communication, we think about interactions. So what is your body language communicating to me? What's mine communicating to you? And there's a lot of reason to believe that this is a valid way to look at this. So social scientists have spent a lot of time looking at the effects of our body language or other people's body language on judgments. And we make sweeping judgments and inferences from body language. You should feel like, oh, I really feel like I got to say who I am and show who I am. So I want to ask you first, both to try power posing, and also I want to ask you to share this science, because this is simple. I don't have ego involved in this. Give it away, like share it with people, because the people who can use it the most are the ones with no resources and no technology and no status and no power.
All right. So what is the purpose of Amy's talk? So unmute yourself and share. So you watch the clip, that's about a little over a minute long. What's the purpose of her talk?
Conveying the importance of body language.
That's it, right? So in her opinion, body language shapes who we are. So, and she ends her lecture, her presentation by try your power pose, right? And then she says, and then teach people, share this with other people. So she believes body languages have power. And then if you just listen to her presentation, it says, fake it till you become it. So let me ask you this, are you every Sunday or whenever you preach, are you able to summarize your sermon in one simple sentence? And in your opinion, do you think your congregation is able to summarize your sermon in one simple sentence? Like, this is what my pastor preached on today. And
I'm working toward it.
that is our hope, right? That is our hope, that we spend so much time preparing these sermons that you want people to walk away from understanding and, more importantly, applying your sermon. But oftentimes it doesn't work that way. Do you know who this person is? The answer is to the right of the picture. Shonda Rhimes. Do you know any idea who she is? No? So you guys are just very good pastors. So she's a very well-known screenwriter and a producer, director. She's a very revered person in Hollywood, and she created some of my favorite shows. And so I really got to know her through the show Scandal. And so I really enjoyed it. And then now, because of COVID, I'm Netflixing like crazy. So I just got into Grey's Anatomy. How many of you have watched that? It's a medical drama. Grey's Anatomy is still going on. I think it's the season 17 just begun not too long ago. And so as I'm watching Grey's Anatomy, she does this thing so brilliantly. She always begins her episode with the monologue, right? And then she ends her episode usually with the monologue. So it's a bookend. And I found that so clever of a format to use when telling a story, because at the end of each episode, it comes full circle. So I want to show you what I mean by showing you an episode of Grey's Anatomy. Let's see. Oh. All right, new share. Okay. Can you see the screen? Okay, wonderful.
We live out our lives on a surgical unit. 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. We're together more than we're apart. George's room is bigger than mine. After a while,
I have more clothes. I should have to go now.
the ways of residency
I got here first. It's Meredith's house. She should decide.
become the ways of life.
My room is like 2 inches bigger than yours.
Number one,
You have the bigger closet. So why is it?
always keep score.
My clothes are there.
Number two, do whatever you can to outsmart the other guy.
Everywhere else is filled with Meredith's mom's boxes. Meredith, when is your mom coming back to town anyway? Because maybe we can put her boxes in storage. Or unpack a few things to make this place a little more homey. Some throw pillows, lamps, a few paintings. Oh, paintings would be nice. Yeah, you have all this amazing stuff just packed away. In the back hall, I found this box with like 100 tapes of your mother performing these amazing medical procedures. Really? We should watch them, Meredith. You want to watch them? Meredith, you want some privacy?
Number three, don't make friends with the enemy.
Morning, Dr. Bailey.
Shut up.
You realize that I'm an attending and you're only a resident. Now, you work for me, right?
Something is happening today. I know I should know what it is, but I just...
All right, nice talking with you, Dr. Bailey.
Watch out, watch out.
on bikes killing themselves. Natural selection is what it is.
So what's up with the Nazis? She off her meds? You never heard of the race?
Excellent board. Well timed, balanced, efficient. If all goes well, we'll have an early night.
Chief, dead baby bike race started 20 minutes ago.
All right, people, Dead Baby Bike Race Day.
Every year, this bar.
The Dead Baby Bar.
Every year, they hold this underground bike race.
Don't you wonder why someone would name a bar something so disgusting?
Keep your panties on easy tree. The race is completely illegal and
Crazy. It's a bunch of bike messengers racing against traffic, trying to beat each other for free shots of tequila.
no holds barred competition sounds like fun. The race,
would think that.
the race doesn't even have any rules except eye gouging. No eye gouging. You're able to be trapped in the pit, banding your opinions when we could be up in the OR. What kind of people engage in a race that has as its only rule that you can't rip out the eyeballs of another human being, Georgie?
I need someone to get up to the OR floor. The chief needs a right hand.
Oh, and yeah, number 4. George, everything is a competition.
Okay, people.
All right, so the monologue sets up the theme of the episode, and then the theme of this episode is competition. Everything is a competition, right? So this is the ending.
There's another way to survive this competition, a way no one ever seems to tell you about, one you have to learn for yourself. Number 5, it's not about the race at all. There are no winners or losers. Victories are counted by the number of lives saved.
All right. So I'm just really impressed with how she employs this, what we call a bookend. So this is my goal. I don't get to preach every Sunday now that I'm no longer in the local church, but my goal is when I preach, I want to preach a sermon that has a bookend. So I start with an idea. A lot of things can happen in the middle, but at the end, I want to bring my listeners back to the point. And so the goal that I hope to accomplish moving forward is that there is this consistency. And the Bible, if you look at it, the biblical theology follows this bookend format as well. So there's Genesis, and then there's the book of Revelation. A lot of things happen in the middle, but Genesis begin with creation story, and Revelation ends with new creation. So I want to push myself to see if I'm able to preach in a way that people walk away knowing that what I preached, and I want to help them get there by using this simple technique of bookending. Okay. Any questions so far? Any comments you would like to make? Nope. Okay, moving along. So I hope you are able to understand that there's a power when we tell stories. And so it's a different book. The book is called Unleash the Power of Storytelling. The author talks about why the stories are powerful. And when we hear stories, we are listening, and there are different types of listening. Passive listening, and then there are active listening. So when we preach, our parishioners can either engage in passive listening. They're listening to you not because they want to listen, but because you're just talking to them and they're just going to have to sit through it. And then same time, same space, but different parishioners may be engaging in active listening. So what makes, in your opinion, what makes stories powerful? Many of us search and spend a lot of time trying to look for the perfect sermon illustration to make our point. So we know that stories have power and communicates things that normally makes it difficult for us to do. So what makes stories powerful? And the author goes one step further and asks this question: nature versus nurture. Why is story powerful? Is it something that's innately programmed in us? Or is it something that we are conditioned? And he believed it's more of a nurture because we're raised on stories. Are you guys familiar with Match.com syndrome? Do you guys know what Match.com is? Right? It's an online dating server. And so the author talks about that there's a top mistake people make when they're filling out their online dating profile. Can you guess what that is? What's the number one mistake people make? So by making this mistake, they don't get the results that they're hoping for, which is to be matched. And the mistake is telling people who they are. And so you might be thinking, hey, but that's the whole point of filling out the profile. You want strangers to read the profile, and if they like what they read, that they will choose you. So the author goes into a little bit more of what he means by telling people who you are. Example, I am a funny person who loves an adventure. So if you read this on a dating profile, would you be interested in clicking this profile? I am a funny person who loves an adventure. And the author says, most likely not, because you're just telling people that you are funny. So in order for you to be cured of the Match.com syndrome, there's only one rule, and the rule is don't tell people who you are. You have to show them that you are who you say you are. So the author calls it show, don't tell. So here's an example. So Joy, who is 27 years old, this is what she wrote. And these are Tinder profiles. Am I on the left or right? Is it a risk you're willing to take? Right? So just by reading the profile, we don't know who Joy is. We don't know if she's the girl in a red tank top or the girl in the black outfit. Right? But then what this profile tells me is that she's funny. She has a sense of humor. Right? So let's go to another one. Another Tinder profile. Jordan, 21, lives in Canada. Hello, ladies. Look at the last guy you matched. Now back to me. Now back to the last guy you matched. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped leaving his bio blank and had better pictures, he could be like me. Look down, back up. Where are you? You're on Tinder with the man of your dreams. What's in your hand? Back to me. I have it. It's a pizza with your favorite toppings again. Look again. The pizza is now your favorite dog. Anything is possible when you match me on Tinder. So this guy, he doesn't say anything about being funny, having a great sense of humor, but just by reading his profile, you get a sense of who he is. So this is showing people who you are rather than telling them. So what about our sermons? How can we tell stories or preach sermons in a way that will win hearts, change minds, and get the results that you're looking for? And according to the author, he points to two things. Know your audience and know your goal. So using the chat box, can you just briefly share with me how many people, average worship attendance, and then the ethnicity of your church? Multicultural. So when you say multicultural, what does that mean?
Can I say that instead of chatting? Just explain my congregation.
Easier, sure.
We have a white African American and African who's from different countries, not who did not grow up here, but who actually moved, and also people who are from Puerto Rico. Yeah, Puerto Rico and Philippines. So it's literally the multicultural.
So multiracial and multi.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. The reason why I ask is I see this in a lot of times in Anglo congregations. Let's say you have worship attendance about 100 and you have like 10 ethnic people. And so they say, oh yeah, I go to a multicultural church. No. That's not a multicultural church. That's an Anglo church, but you have some people of ethnic backgrounds. So I just wanted to know. All right, so most of us are serving in an Anglo congregation. There's some who serves, white and black, Japanese Americans, Caucasian, Korean. Okay, white with just one black, right? So most of you are serving in a predominantly Anglo churches. What is the most difficult thing about your ministry? So you're in a cross-cultural, cross-racial appointment, most of you. What is the difficult thing? And you don't have to type it, you can just say it.
Understanding about the interest and concern, general concern about my congregation, since we have we are the cross-racial church, and I know that probably depending on where they grew up, their interest and concern might be a little bit different from each other. So it's been challenging for me to prepare the sermon. It's been 4 years to serve the cross-racial and cross-cultural church for me. And not only that, but also multi-generation. That also really hard for me to focus where I'm gonna focusing on. Focusing on the audience who are in my congregation or targeted audience I would like to bring into my congregation more.
Hold that thought. That's very important. And we'll cover that after the break. Right? What is the role of the preacher? Right? Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? What's the difficulty about being in ministry in a CRCC setting for you? Nothing? Wow, I'm impressed. For me, I think I always I never received an appointment where they were happy to receive me. So they were never like, oh my gosh, we're getting Munyang, we are so blessed, right? But luckily for me, I always ended it on a happy ending. I was always able to break their stereotype, right? So you think I'm young now. I was like super young when I first began, right? So one of the churches, when they heard that they're receiving a young Asian woman, they were building a stepping stool, because in that congregation's mind, Asian women are short, petite, and very cute. So I know only few of you know me, but one of the things you immediately recognize when you meet me in person is my height. I'm very tall. So when I visited the church, the trustees chair is like, oh my gosh, okay, we're not gonna make that stepping stool, right? And so that's stereotype. So they're like, you know, everybody wants to know. They have two questions. How old are you and how tall are you? And then I was like, that can't be the question you have for the incoming pastor. But as Asians and as ethnic minorities, and most important, as immigrants, stereotype is something that we are just gonna face. So you have to get comfortable with it. So when I got, when the announcement went out that I was gonna be the new district superintendent of Hawaii, right? It's not of like some boony town in Mississippi, Hawaii. Do you know what's the first thing people asked? Guess. Take a wild guess. Moon Young Lee will be the new Hawaii district superintendent. And people in Hawaii responded by saying, does she speak English? Someone with the name Moon Young. Are we able to understand her? Right? In Hawaii, we're like, we don't have a majority ethnicity, but if you pick the top, it's Asian Americans. Even then they asked and questioned. So I was just like, well then, I don't know how I feel about going to Hawaii. But then I was talking to Reverend Tom Choi. So Reverend Tom Choi, he really doesn't talk about himself, but he's like a trailblazer for Korean Americans. So he was my predecessor's predecessor. So I was talking to him and I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. You know, they questioning me whether I'm American enough or whether I speak English. Like, I don't know where to go from there. And then he shared with me when he came to Hawaii as a local church pastor. His name is Thomas Choi, right? He has an English name. I have a Korean name. He has an English name. And they also questioned him, do you speak English? Right? So if CalPAC, one of the most diverse conferences going through this, I can only imagine what UMass going through. So as I'm doing church conferences, that's one of the concerns I hear. We don't understand our pastor. Our pastor is a very hardworking, very spiritual person, but she or she has accents. And we don't understand. So in your opinion, what can you do? What can you do? Tell me, what do you do?
One of the the challenges that I actually had was I moved this current appointment last year, and everything was good, but with some challenges with some other community leaders, such as for example, like finance committee. And whenever we had some plan to do something, and they always try to, move things in their own way. So long story short, when we had the nomination committee a couple months ago, and so we had quite struggling each other because the one thing I heard from the finance committee people was that before I moved to the current position, and the finance committee kind of, decide that so we're gonna have a pastor, Korean pastor from a rural community. So he might not know anything about our church situation. So they kind of had conversation that I think in a nice way for the church. So we need to drive our church in our own way rather than let him lead our church. So, and I realized that the church is, especially key leaders are concerning the church future a lot when they have a new minister. So I learned something more and more. So my bottom line is that I had to sit down with the finance committee leaders and some other key leaders and had a long conversation and listen to them their concern. So the long story short, it's a learning process, and I think it requires lots of patience. And so I was quite surprised that they had kind of discussion like that before I moved here, but it's going okay, but it was quite challenging too. Yeah,
Definitely.
I think they were concerning as they have the Korean pastor from a smaller congregation, especially when the church is facing some challenges. So I think I don't think that they had a negative decision, but they were concerning very much. So that actually kind of brought them a decision, something like that too. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Moksani, for sharing. And I think that's something that most of us can resonate with. All right. Anybody else? What are some difficult things you face as a
And I'm
Korean?
a first to, ethnic pastor in my local church was appointed, someone who speaks English as a second language. So when I appointed here 3 years ago, there were a few people who complaining about that they cannot understand what I'm talking about, while majority of people were okay about, my talking because of, as you just mentioned, the accent and, some maybe wrong pronunciation. But I realized that, but it wasn't really not about English, but, they were really, those few people were really doubting about my identity as pastor. So, although one-on-one, conversation had no problem at all. So, so I think he really cannot see me as, as his pastor. So it took a while, but after building relationship, my English is same. He now, understand fully what I'm preaching. So I think, it's hard sometimes, especially different culture and different ethnicity. It takes time to get to know and build trust relationship. And I think, once we have a great relationship, I think accent is not a matter.
Right. And relationship makes a difference how your church hears you. So I think Canon Callahan says if you're a pastor who really focuses on relationship building, then if you are a preacher on a scale of 1 to 10, and let's say you're preaching at a 6, right? So not just average, right? 6 average. But if you're a good pastoral pastor, even though you're preaching at a 6, your members hear you as if you're preaching at an 8. And if you're a preacher who preaches at a level of 9, but you don't have those relationships in place, then they hear you at about a 7. So relationship makes a difference. And we know this, right? Some church members praise their pastor's preaching ability. So we're like, oh, okay, that person must be a great preacher. And then we listen to their sermons and we're like, hey, I can preach better than them, or I didn't see anything extraordinary about that preaching. But to the ears of the listener, that relationship helps. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Clark that it's relationship, and all you have to do is probably bring out your authenticity to the congregation, and that's all. You have to prove to them that you're not there just as a pastor, you're in there Sunday on meetings, but you want to just be there as, their family, as a community,
That's so true. Yeah. So you share, you become partners in ministry. So let us just raise hands. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you became pastors because you wanted to be pastors? Okay, so 1, 2, oh, keep them up, keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, 8 people. Wow. Okay, lower your hands. How many of you became pastors because God wanted you to become pastors? Oh, some of you raised twice. What is that? Is an issue of discernment? Okay. So, 성래 목사님, you raised your hand twice. Explain.
No, I mean, I think it's both ways. I feel like I'm called, and that's why I wanted to accept the calling. So I didn't know when I first heard your first question. I didn't know you were going to ask the second question.
So a lot of times, Korean pastors who finish their seminary education in Korea and they come to States and they go through seminary again and they pursue candidacy process. One of the difficulties they have going through the process is articulation of call. Because in the Korean culture, it's all about obedience, right? It's about servanthood and sacrifice. So they're like, I don't understand what the DCOM is asking. I dedicated my life to be a pastor. Right? And then, but in the States, it's all about, well, that's great. But did God call you into ordained ministry? Right? So we are all here. I want to affirm we're all here because God has placed a sacred call on your life. Okay. So with that understanding, how many of you, when the call came, you're like, yes, Lord, use me as your servant? Raise your hand. 1, 2. Okay. What happened to the 6 others? Okay. Then with that same train of thought, how many of you are here because God called you? 1, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Then what about those who didn't raise your hand? Like, why are you here? Did the bishop says you're such a gifted person, you need to become a pastor? Is that why you're here? Yes? No? So like Pastor Daniel, nah, you didn't raise your hand for anything. So why are you here?
Yes, I was born on Christian family. I'm the person to believe God. But when in college, I'm not seminarian. I'm just finished my Master of Divinity. In the major in my college, at times I learned from my friend and who was Christian family. So I acknowledge that it was a blessing to belong to God. And even at that time, I envy to the friend. So I'm really willing to be pastor because I just only focus on blessing. But later on, yes, that is true. God calls me. And after that, so I don't know which portion do I raise my hand. So I'm hesitate. But the pastors call anyone, first one, second one. Yeah, that is true. We are called by God.
You're all called by God. Yeah. All right, so let's share with one another. So for those of you, we're all called. Those of you who wanted to become pastor, when you receive that call, you're like, yes, Lord, that's what I want to do. When you entered ministry, how did it go? All good?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Okay. What happened?
My father is a pastor. So I grew up in the ministry, but my father and mother never shared with me what happened in the ministry exactly. They never share any single story about what happened in the church. So what I saw is all the joy and happinesses and beautiful things in ministry, but I didn't realize that there was a lot of struggling and things in the behind the scene, how my father and mother struggle, because my father served the church as a lead pastor until when I was 14 years old, and since 15, he served as a kind of like a conference in he's a,
extension ministry.
Yeah, extension ministry. So I've never actually, I mean, I saw and I remember something, but my memory is, only remember the happiness and joy in the, ministry part when my mother and father served the church. But, once I become high schooler, I mean, a middle schooler who can see and understand, back then, I actually never had a chance to realize and understand what's the reality in the ministry. You know what I'm saying? So when I actually share my calling to my father and mother, their first reaction was, no, because I truly believe that God called me, but my parents knew that the reality and the hardship of the female pastor, how they have what kind of thing they have to get through. So my father really said, you can go to seminary, but you cannot be a pastor. That was, I can't allow you to be pastor. That was my father's reaction. So from the beginning, I was struggling to prove myself and articulate my calling to not only to my family, but also to the church community. And even when I come here, when I get through the DCOM question, why do you want to be a pastor? What is your calling? So that is my story.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay. What about those who didn't want to be a pastor, but entered ministry? How was it for you when you entered ministry? Was it hardships or was it good?
I think both. Yeah, I mean, somehow I not from only from my senior pastor that you are called to be a pastor. I rejected so many times that I don't want to. The number one was I just told him that I cannot be like you who always smiling to other people. And I was teenager, so I said that I want to put some, shorter miniskirt, miniskirt makeup, and I want to go to club and, all these things. I thought that pastors cannot do so many things in my view. As a young student, I thought that there are so many things that are limited to the pastor. I thought that if I become a pastor, I cannot get married because I'm a woman. In Korean society, it's not easy to be a pastor. So, I mean, I thought that no one gonna marry me if I'm a pastor, So there are so many things that there are so many reasons I reject to be a pastor, Although somehow, I mean, God gave me heart so many times that you are called to, but I was, keep running away from that calling. So since I, started a ministry, because I knew about those, as some of them shared, all those dark side of the ministry, somehow, it was okay to jump into ministry because I knew that I knew that what I'm gonna face with as a female pastor, and I knew that how, in Korean society is so, a lot of discrimination between male pastor and female pastor. Salary is different, and preaching opportunity for adult ministry is different. I knew that, and so when I started, I grumbling, and I tasted bitterness, but I was there and I learned a lot. And I think the main reason I came to US is because of that. I believe because I really didn't get an opportunity to preach to adult as a female pastor. Although my friend, same age, same, education level, but they got opportunity to preach for adult service in the church where I served. So I thought that there is no hope in Korea for me to be a pastor. That's why I came here. So it was, I think have both sides to accepting God's calling as a pastor is somehow really joyful, but also, taking all those facing with all those challenges.
I hear you. I hear you. Yes, the lack of opportunity, the unequal opportunity. I hear you. So now let us share with one another. What are your gifts in ministry? Like, this is my gift, and I can see that God has called me into ministry because of this gift. Gifts and graces? What are your gifts and graces in ministry? Don't be humble now. Don't be a typical Koreans. I don't know you well enough for me to fish it out of you.
I believe God gave me great heart to listen to people and a great pastoral caregiver, because I love to visit people and I love to spend time with them. So since this is my second appointment, since I'm studied this process, but wherever I go, they always told me that you are the first one who visited my home. You are the first one who remembered my birthday. You are the first one, who remember my children, or so like I think those personal interaction and relationship building, I think that's my gift that really brought many people who unchurched people, for a long time, started to come back to church and even bring their families and relatives. So I think that I believe that's gift God gave me.
Yes, and a very, very special one at that too. Okay, thank you. What about others? What are your gifts in ministry?
For me, I think I have a passion for Christ Jesus, even though I'm not sure whether I believe I have a call to ministry from God, but I'm still discerning that call to find out exactly. And but I'm still praying that God, if it is my will, but not your will, please move this cup. I mean, please release from this ministry. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, but I have a passion so that I'm still standing on here. And also I think I can use plain language when I preach. So this is because I'm serving kindergarten children for a while, for a long time. So I'm familiar use simple and plain language to deliver the gospel to the really, really youngest children in the ministry setting.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? What are your gifts and graces in ministry?
I believe I have gift of bringing healing to my congregation, because before I was appointed to my church, there was a big trouble, like conflict between previous pastor and my congregation. So I heard from many of my congregation that they were going to leave the church, but they did not. And after I was appointed there, I tried to build relationship, trusting relationship, and try to be authentic and provide pastoral care to them. So the church is now, most people attending, they are very active in the church ministry, and yeah, we are happy with congregation now. So I'm grateful for that.
Wow, what a sacred gift. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? What are your gifts and graces in ministry?
Well, I didn't enter ministry because of this. I entered seminary. It starts off from seminary, but I entered because my heart goes out to the weak, sick, and the elderly. And actually my calling, it's all started off with that. And then everything else is history, where you meet people and they put you somewhere. And this is how far I came. But my heart goes out to the weak and the sick and elderly. And I like to listen to people, have the ears to listen to them. And if any of you have met me, if you meet me in person or people see me in public, you may see me as like very reserved and very stoic. But once I sit down and talk, I mean, this is what people say. It's like, I'm drawn to them and they're drawn to me. And they just want to keep talking and get to know me. So that brings the congregation, the congregants, puts them really comfortable.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it sounds like a lot of us have interpersonal skills as one of their gifts and graces, relationship building, community building. It's very good. What about others?
I think my gift is as other pastors shared, my gift is also building a relationship and engage with the people well. So so I've been this church, my new church, for 4 months, but the one of the positive feedback I heard from the congregation is and as well as not this church, but my previous church too, people more like to engage to the ministry than before. So for example, church council meeting, in my previous church used to be only 5 people show up. But when I leave the church, 10 people show up in the church council meeting. So I kind of see that the change, and people actually share the feedback that I'm good at engaging with people and inviting people to join in the ministry. So that's kind of what I learned through my serving the ministry. I didn't know that I had that gift until I serving the ministry. So
right. And that's the special part, discovering our gifts that we didn't know we had before. So I have an older sister who's also a United Methodist clergy. And my sister, so I was raised in a family where boys became pastors and girls became samonim. But out of my generation, my sister was the only one who embraced that call, right? She's like, I'm gonna become a samonim. And so like her entire life was focused on that. So when she was 5 years old, 4 or 5, she asked my parents to enroll her in piano school because she wanted to learn how to play the piano. So when she becomes a pastor's wife, she can help her husband's ministry. And when she went to college, she majored in psychology in hopes to become like a counselor or psychologist so she can help with family and marriage counseling. So her entire life was centered on becoming a pastor's wife. So she was like a Jesus freak. That's what me and my cousins were like, oh, she's always so like churchy and she loves Jesus. And so when she received her call to ordain ministry, nobody was like too surprised by it, right? So we're like, oh, blessings to you. But when I received my call to ordain ministry, I was very shocked because I never wanted to be a pastor's wife to begin with. Right. But then something happened in my life where I was like, okay, God, I commit to you. If that's the purpose you have for me, then I submit. But then now God changed our deal and says, now I called you to be a pastor. But the hesitancy I have the most is unlike my sister, who is so gifted. Like my sister is so good with arts and music. She's such a compassionate person. She loves church, but she loves people. I don't. I'm an introvert, and I would call a borderline antisocial introvert. So for me, being around people is a task. Being around people saps my energy, and to be around people who don't like me or who accept me, that's a challenge, right? And I'm not really good at anything. So as I was growing up, one of the Bible scripture, the text that I hated was the parable of the talents. Because I thought at least the guy who buried his talent, he had one, but God didn't give me anything, right? I had 0 talent. So I used to always joke with my parents, like God gave me height, but then he didn't give me anything else. So with my height, I can't even do anything because I don't have any athleticism. Right? So I can't even run fast. I don't know how to play basketball. And so when I received call to ministry, I just didn't know why I was being called. But a lot of things happened and I finally said, okay, I submit to you and I become a pastor. And then upon entering ministry, I realized that I have a gift. And so I shared with you earlier that none of my churches, when they received the news that I was going to be their pastor, says, "Oh my gosh, we're so lucky. We can't wait for her to be our pastor," right? And then so I always enter the appointment going, well, the feeling is mutual. I don't want to be here too, but I'm here because God wants me here. So let's make the most of it. So my very first appointment, I don't know what I'm doing. And then through my provisional years, I realized that God is working through the way in which I preach. But I'm not a good preacher. But if you were to ask my churches, what is Moonyoung's gifts in ministry, they'll tell you it's our preaching. So how can that be when I'm not a good preacher? And I'm not being humble, saying, oh, I am a good preacher, but I'm just going to pretend that. No, I am not a good preacher. But the gift that God has given me is a gift of storytelling. So I can tell stories really, really well. So all the churches who have doubted me because I was young and I was ethnic and I was a woman, I was able to establish my credibility every Sunday when I would preach. People say, oh, okay, so she is working hard, right? Because her sermons make sense. It's not like she put it together on the drive to church this morning. And so I realized upon entering ministry that the gift of storytelling is what's helping me become a preacher. And so I don't know about you, but preaching time is very sacred for me because that's the only time where I can talk to my church without being interrupted. Is that same for you? Because if you serve at an Anglo church, man, they talk over you. There's no respect. You know, just because you're a pastor who is appointed by the bishop, they like, yeah, yours is an opinion. You may be our pastor, but what you're saying is an opinion, right? But preaching is an uninterrupted time of 10 to 15 minutes where I get to talk to my church. Do you agree? So I'm not teaching this class because I'm a good preacher. Most likely, you are by far better and stronger preacher than me, hands down. But what I can do is that I can preach a sermon that is very engaging. Okay, so I hope to share that with you. But it's a gift, correct? So, for example, I'm not a manuscript preacher. So people come and ask me, do you memorize your sermons? I'm not smart enough to memorize 10 to 15 minutes worth of sermons. So this is a pure gift. But I am able to organize my sermon in a way that is very easy to understand. I talk to my congregation as if they're 5. I don't use any difficult vocabulary. And it becomes a story that is not even mine to tell. It's God's story I'm telling. And most likely from your churches, you probably have seasoned members of stories that they're very familiar with. So we're gonna go on a coffee break, but when we come back, we're gonna talk about our role as a storyteller. And I understand not all the preachers adopt this style of preaching. So how can we use a different technique of utilizing stories so that your sermons will have the effect that you are looking for? So right now, I have 10:20. Let's meet back at 10:30. So 10 minutes. All right, go enjoy your break. All right, welcome back. Most of you are back. I'm gonna switch back to share screen. So preaching is a sacred moment. And my suggestion, which I know you all know, don't waste it. Don't waste it. It's a uninterrupted time where you get to address your congregation and anybody who is attending your worship service. So that we can get to know one another a little bit better, please let me know, what is your preaching style? Out of these four, what's yours? Are you more like a lecturer? Are you a motivational speaker? Do you adopt the role as a theologian? Or are you a storyteller?
I'm trying hard to transition from an essayist to, I guess, a motivational speaker.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So you're more of a theologian right now. You teach your congregation
Yeah,
a lot of theological concepts about God. Okay.
I try to do less of it, in other words.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be a little simpler, hopefully,
Yes.
in my speech.
Gotcha. Okay. Anybody else? All of the above? None of the above? You guys are so quiet all of a sudden. What's going on?
I think I'm also having a transition from the writer to speech.
Okay.
But recently I would like to be a storyteller, because I thought that that's more effective and cultural during this time.
Okay. All right. Who are some of your favorite preachers from the Bible? Like if you can preach like this person, who would that person be? Minus Jesus. We're going to remove Jesus from the equation.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just roaring in the wilderness. Oh, okay. There's one in the chat. Let's see. Oh. Can someone read what's in the chat box? I can't Because I'm sharing screen, it's difficult for me to
I
access.
said Paul and Peter.
Okay, Paul and Peter. Oh, okay. Why?
I think the at least two things from each of them. I think the Apostle Paul, he had a lot of a brokenness in his life journey, and also lots of a grace that he received. So whenever I read his writings, I felt like his heart toward his people. And Apostle Peter, quite similar. And I think he had such a confidence in his life journey. So yeah, I think that really touches me in a powerful way. Yeah.
And both of them very powerful preachers. Right? Peter preached his first sermon. How many people accepted Christ? 3,000. Right? So he's a very powerful preacher. Anybody else before we move on?
His name is also Peter.
Say that again. 감독님, I didn't hear you.
The pastor's name is Peter.
Oh, that's right, right. Aptly named for the person he strives to be. You're right.
I think the one thing I'm just keeps looking at is the Apostle Paul and Peter. Both of them really experienced the brokenness in their life journey a lot, and they also experienced the loss of grace of God in their life journey. And I think that really brought them to proclaim the gospel in such a powerful and effective way, to persuade God's people to be drawn to the Christ somehow effective way. I think that really tells me something. Yeah.
That does. So hold on to that thought, the experience that they've had, because we're going to come back to that. Okay, let us move forward. Do you know this hymn? We've a story. We've a story to tell to the, right? It's beautiful hymn. Let me just read it for you. We've a story to tell to the nations that shall turn their hearts to the right. A story of truth and mercy, a story of peace and light, a story of peace and light. For the darkness shall turn to dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright. And Christ's great kingdom shall come on earth, the kingdom of love and light. So all of us are called to preach the word of God. Do you agree? And it's not just our stories, it's God's story. And this story has been around since the beginning of time. So we are given the opportunity to share an ancient story that some are very well familiar with, some who have no idea. So you have a very, very special and daunting task to carry out. So let us talk about new versus anew. What is the difference between the two words?
I think a new is kind of totally new, and a new is a kind of resuming something again.
Very good, very good. Yes, that is correct. So, you know, I shared earlier that I never thought I would be called to ordain ministry. But after fighting God, after years of discernment, I decided that I was going to obey, and I entered into ordained ministry. And about a month after receiving my very first appointment, after being a moksa, I told myself I need to leave ministry. It was just too stressful. So I called my dad to just give him heads up. So I said, Appa, I'm gonna leave ministry. It's not for me. 목회는, you know, it's not something I can do. Clearly, I gave it a try. My personal happiness matters. My sanity matters. And then so my dad asked me, like, Munyounga, what's so difficult about ministry? You're just like month in. So I told my dad, Appa, preaching every Sunday is like sapping my energy and the will to live, right? And then my dad just looked at me. He's like, Munyoung, I preach every 새벽 기도. I preach 수요 예배. I preach on Friday nights and multiple services on Sunday. Is my daughter complaining because she preaches one sermon a week? And then like back then, my sermon was like 10 minutes, like 12 minutes. And I was like, nah, right, yes. Because I felt like preaching every Sunday was like having a paper due every week. At least like when you go to school, after you turn in a big assignment, you get a couple weeks off. But like being a lead pastor, being a pastor in charge, it meant that I had to produce. I had something that was due every Sunday. But after having that conversation with my dad, I was like, oh, you're right. Talk about perspective. I have nothing to complain. If the biggest problem I have in ministry is preaching for 10 minutes once a week, then I have a good life. So I decided to use the preaching opportunity to try something new. And I decided to do this because the first church I was appointed to, most of my members are really elderly. They're like beyond senior citizens. So like there was like a 50-year difference between them and me. And like many of them were transplants. They were from the Midwest who made the move to the West. So Anglo, from the old school, older generation. So I said to myself, they probably heard all the sermons you can preach on the topic that I have chosen. So I said, I'm gonna make their time worthwhile. I'm gonna experiment, right? So I started to preach, trying new things, using it as an experiment, not to just like rile them up, but to see if I can preach the ancient text anew. So one of the things that I really want to share with you today is that there is nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. So whatever life-changing, life-transforming, life-giving sermon you're gonna give, most likely your members have heard it before. And if there are concepts that have yet to be developed, most likely you're not gonna be the person who comes up with that. Right? There are PhD students who are probably working on their dissertation as they speak. So let go of that pressure that you have to wow them, that you have to say something so new that they're going to be like, oh my gosh, our pastor is such a wonderful preacher. So let go of that pressure, right? Because nothing you say is new under the sun. So as we mentioned, new is something that was not in existence before that is just coming into existence. But a new is something again and once more. So oftentimes when I pray the prayer right before I preach, the prayer is, may we hear this text anew. May we love you anew, right? Renew our sense anew, come to us anew. So don't focus on what you're going to preach as much as why you're preaching that. Okay, so I know it's kind of late in the day for our East Coast folks, so let's do some fun activity. In the early Christian church, what do you think the $1 million question was?
When Jesus came back to the earth.
Go a little bit. Oh, you're thinking too deep. This is light exercise. light exercise. Munyang's not that smart. I'm not going to take you down that path. Okay. So if you read Book of Acts and the epistles, the $1 million question is the Jews versus Gentiles. All right? Did the salvation come only for the Jews, the Judeo-Christian community, or for the entire world? What is the $1 million question within the UMC prior to COVID?
LGBTQ issue?
That is correct, right? full inclusion or biblical obedience? Okay. All right, this one, you guys should get it right. For Koreans, what is the $1 million question? Light, nothing deep, nothing political, very light. How do you eat your 탕수육? Do you pour the sauce or do you dip it in the sauce? Right? Are you a 부먹 or 찍먹? Along the same vein, what about for Americans? What do you think is the $1 million question? Something to do with food.
Democratic war.
No, something like
eating pizza
with hand or fork.
Yeah, hand or fork.
Oh, you know, I didn't think about that. Next year, I will use that. But I thought this was the $1 million question. Coke versus Pepsi. How many of you are Coca-Cola fans? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. How many of you are Pepsi lover? Interesting. All right. Open happiness. Where you have heard this from? If you know where you heard it from, unmute yourself and let us know. Open happiness. You've heard it. I know you have. Any idea?
I just Googled it and it says Coca-Cola.
That's right. That's right. It was Coca-Cola slogan 2009. Do you find anything interesting about this slogan? So what I'm about to say is not my thought. I heard it when I attended Ken and Callahan's seminar, but it made such a impact when I heard it. So I use it and remind myself, open happiness. So why would a beverage company say open happiness as their slogan? Shouldn't it be drink happiness? Right? Open happiness. Open happiness with Coca-Cola. What are they doing? By making their slogan open happiness, what do you think Coca-Cola is doing? Besides hiring a very excellent publicity firm, what are they trying to accomplish?
I guess they're trying.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I guess they're trying to make that action of opening a can as a symbol of opening happiness, and I don't know. Somehow it clicks. Right?
Yeah.
Making a symbolism of that action.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. So what Coca-Cola is saying is they're making association. So when you go to a ball game, what beverage do you drink? Coca-Cola. When you go to the movie theater, when you're doing something fun, something brings you joy, happy memories, Coca-Cola is always there. Right? So if a beverage company can be so bold to say open happiness with a can of Coke, open happiness with a bottle of Coke, shouldn't that be church's slogan? Open happiness in your life with the community of God. But how many churches can guarantee that people would experience happiness when they come and become a member of our faith community? Right? But this should be something we should expect from churches. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Do we come expecting to taste and see that the Lord is good? And do you preach on Sundays to let people know that the Lord is good? And so as preachers, we are given a very, very daunting task. We are entrusted with faith and spiritual formation. So this is not my word, but this is from Romans. Faith comes from hearing. So when we preach, growth needs to be taking place among our parishioners. Does it always? That's something to be debatable. So in your opinion, who is a modern day storytelling preacher? A contemporary of ours who recently passed away several years ago. Any ideas?
Eugene Peterson.
Oh, Eugene Peterson's good. So I had another person in mind. Have you heard of Reverend Fred Craddock? And I didn't create a bibliography, but if you want to learn more about preaching style of Reverend Craddock, these are the books I would recommend for you. So according to Reverend Craddock, so if you read this book, Craddock on the Craft of Preaching, his book is written in a way that it becomes like a story. He's telling a story. So it's an easier book to read than a textbook on preaching. So if you have time and if you want to explore becoming a storytelling preacher, I will definitely recommend this book. So he makes some very interesting points in the book. He says, we don't just speak to the people. And I never thought about it this way. I always thought I was preaching to the people. But remember earlier, prior to the interview, one of the ways for us to utilize stories effectively is to know our audience. Do you remember that? And this is why. Good storytelling speaks for the congregation and evokes their own stories. So we're not just teaching them new concepts or preaching to them God's message to them. In a form of a sermon, we represent the people. So, we have theological education. We have the tools to articulate theology. So by hearing our sermons, our members have to say, I get it. Like they knew what it was, but then the things that they were unable to articulate, we say it as a representative. And as they hear our sermons, it triggers response from them. And Reverend Craddock goes a step further and says, preaching is to create an experience. But unfortunately, many preachers use it to share information. So was it Peter Moksanim? You talked about Paul and Peter, how they have experiences, correct? So when they preach, there is a wealth of information that's coming out, but what they're doing well is by preaching, they're able to have people say, I understand what they're saying. So they create this connection from their listeners.
I think the one thing caught my mind is I think the deliver the message is really makes sense to me. The term deliver, because in order to deliver, we have to receive the package. So then we can deliver the package which we received from somewhere. So I think we receive the message from our God, and then we experience it, and then we deliver exactly what we experience to the congregation, so then they can experience the same thing, not because of the message itself, but because of that gospel which the deliverer received, So I think it's really makes sense to me when I look at all of this concept with
That's
this
true.
explanation. Yeah.
So storytelling is a type of delivery. It's a literary device, how you deliver the word of God. So Craddock goes one step further and says, the power in storytelling is identification. So when you use stories, when you become a storyteller, people identify. They see themselves in their story. So it no longer becomes this like foreign story. It becomes their story. They see themselves and they know what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to be thinking. So they evoke a lot of emotions. So Matthew 14, verses 22-33, it's a story of Peter walking on water. Right? So if you were to preach this text, what are some of the themes that many preachers lift up? Have no fear. Do not be afraid. Take that leap of faith. Correct? When you see Jesus, what are you supposed to do? Follow him. So we all know that we've all heard those sermons before, correct? So I preached on this text many times, but I received such a positive response when I incorporated a personal story of mine. So you remember, I am not afraid to experiment when I preach. So I said, oh, they're so familiar with characters that's already on it. Why don't I explore characters that are invisible, but we know that they are there. So every time I preach this text now, I talk about my time in England. When I went to Europe for the very first time, I turned 21, and me and 5 of my friends, we decided to backpack around England. But we didn't do any research. We come from a small college town in Southern California, and we lived in a bubble. Anything we wanted to do, it just came to us. So we thought, hey, why do we need to research when we go to a territory we've never been to? Everything will just fall into our lap. So there are 6 girls backpacking through England, and I'm the only United Methodist. And I decide to take them to Bristol to see John Wesley's, so Methodist's very first chapel. But one thing we didn't know is that when you go to Europe, the biggest difference between the United States and Korea is that everything in Europe closes early. So by the time we get there, it's like 7 o'clock and all the stores are closed. There was like one KFC that was open, and they were like, oh, you guys can order, but you guys can't even eat inside the restaurant. And because we didn't do any research, when we got to Bristol, no hotels, motels, inns had room because they had a large conference in the city. So we had no place to sleep. So if you see the top right-hand corner, that's me and my friends. It's about like midnight. And we called so many hotels, cities adjacent to Bristol, trying to look for a room, but it's all booked because they had a large conference in the city. So we made peace. And we told ourselves that we're gonna have to spend the night in the streets of Bristol. Okay? So this is about midnight, and the top right-hand corner, if you look at the girl to the very left, her name is Chris. And she's a very outgoing extrovert to the 100th power kind of friends. So throughout this whole trip, we are just being mean to Chris, like, oh, you're so crazy, just calm down, right? Don't attract attention to ourselves. But around 1 o'clock in the morning, there are 2 strangers walking by us. And my friend Chris says, hello, and brings attention to us. So we like yell at her. We're like, don't say hi. They can be like serial killers. We might just die in England. But because my friend is such an outgoing person, she struck up a conversation, and then the strangers invited us home. So we crazy 21-year-olds spent the night at a random stranger's house. But that was the highlight of our trip. And we still talk about it. It's been almost 20 years since we've taken that trip, and we still talk about it to this day. So I talk about Chris whenever I'm preaching a sermon on Matthew 14. So my friend Chris is like Peter. She sees these people and she says, hello. She's unafraid. Well, then who am I? And so I say to my people, I am like those disciples who are in the boat telling Peter to sit back down because he's rocking the boat. So Peter sees Jesus and he's ready to climb out and jump on the water and walk towards our Lord and Savior. But I, even though I'm a faithful disciple, I'm telling Peter, sit down, don't stand up, don't even try to walk it. And so every time I share this story, people resonate with me. They're like, that's right, I am not Peter. I'm not the type who's gonna, upon seeing Jesus, gonna jump out when there's a storm or when the boat is rocking. I'm the type who's thinking very hard, rowing very hard, trying to get us to safety. And so every time I preach this and I incorporate Chris into the story, people get it. So we're wrapping up. How do you become a great storytelling preacher? According to Craddock, it starts with you being a good listener. He says, if you don't listen, you can't speak well. So listen. Open up your ears, not just listening to the movement of the Spirit, but listening to life. What's around you, the current events, your members, your church, your family. Be a good listener. And secondly, study the text and get to know the text. Before you hit the commentary, you need to study the text. And Craddock talks about how one time he preached a text on the 99 sheep and how Jesus went out to search for one. But he says he didn't study the text well, and he thought the 99 sheep were already in safety. And then 3 years later, he went back and read it, and he realized the 99 sheep were also in the wilderness. So he talks about how knowing the text helped him preach the sermon that was supposed to be preached. And number 3, he encourages us to use stories that are realistic and appropriate to the sermon that creates a continuity of experience. Sometimes we hear good sermon illustrations, so we get excited to fit that into our sermon, but the story takes a life of its own. So he says, choose a story, if you're going to use a sermon illustration, that is fitting to your text. All right. That's it for now. It's 11:01, so I want to honor the time that we have. Do you have any questions?
Yes, Pastor, I have one.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I totally agree with you. I really enjoyed your presentation and your teaching today. I really like your teaching today. You know what? I listen to other pastor sermons during the week on YouTube. I think they are teaching me, how to preach and how to deliver my sermon to others. And 문현 목사님, I don't think you believe. I don't think you believe in me. I listened to your sermons, 2 or 3 times when you were at Visual UMC. I think your sermons are still on YouTube, and we can also watch your sermons. So you never watch, you never read your manuscript. You memorize the whole things, and I think your delivery is perfect. I really enjoyed your sermon, and I think people. Other pastors can watch your sermons on YouTube right now because your sermons on YouTube still are on YouTube. Yeah, and yeah, so I really enjoyed your sermon today. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
So the whole point of becoming an effective preacher is not to adopt a new story. You have to be authentic to yourself. So if you're a manuscript preacher, you just try to be the best manuscript preacher you can. But don't be afraid to explore and try new things. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day and happy Thanksgiving. I
All
know
right,
there's
yeah.
a session next
And
week.
next week we'll be off. We have a break.
That's correct. So enjoy your break. Enjoy your time with your loved ones. All right. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.